What this is about is kind of how to address the risk that is just out there on the marketplace. And that's where, LLCs, limited liability companies, come into play. A limited liability company is a legal invention. It exists for a very particular reason, or very group of very particular reasons, one of which is to limit personal liability. So, obviously, we want businesses to scale, to serve their customers. And it's hard to do that if you've got in the back of your mind concerns about the risk that's out there and the effect of that risk, right? So think about this as a way to allow you in your business capacity to kind of focus on being on offense, on the things that really matter to growing your business. So what an LLC does is it provides legal protection. That's kind of the first sort of basic fundamental virtue or value of establishing your business as an LLC. If you have an LLC, your personal assets are protected. They're protected from the company failing. They're protected from being seized. So that's one of the reasons why an important legal tip around doing real estate investing is to think about your business from the perspective of a limited liability company. Bob, why don't I pass it to you here for just a little bit more color?
I mean, I think the first thing that you need to think about is, what are your other assets? And you should know that there are people operating in this space as folks who do rehabs or fix and flippers, who actually create a new entity for every property that they rehab. That way they're limiting the liability on that project to that project. And even the other houses that they're flipping are not necessarily going to be accessed by creditors who might have a claim based on property number one. So that shows you how seriously some people take limited liability companies and the proper formation of them. You don't know if there was a meth lab operated in that house 2 owners ago, and somebody dumped toxic chemicals in the back of the property, and they subsequently have an impact on people who are living next door or in the house. You don't necessarily know those things, and there's strict liability in a lot of environmental statutes. And so parking that liability in a limited liability company is very important, and trying to keep it there. If your LLC documents require that there have to be a vote of all the members for a certain activity, well, make sure that that vote occurs and is documented so that you can show that you're honoring the existence of your corporate entity borrower. If you're having to use personal credit cards to finance a project, think about how you're doing that. Consider potentially taking a cash advance and using that cash as a capital contribution into your LLC, as opposed to just going to Home Depot and buying supplies with your personal charge card and not having documentation about how things have been contributed into the LLC, just to honor the existence of that LLC, because in a worst case scenario, you'll be glad you did.
I think that's great. I'll just add one more thing, and then we can kind of go through the points on this slide. There are some favorable tax consequences of an LLC. So I think that's the other reason to strongly consider an LLC. I'll just sort of refer to what the Texas courts have said about LLCs, which is that they're the best of both worlds. They provide liability protection, and they also provide the favorable tax treatment of a partnership. Again, that's the high level view from our courts about the benefits of LLC. So think about it from a tax perspective, think about it from a liability protection standpoint. One of the ways that people get tripped up around LLCs is when the LLC is, just to use now a Latin term, which, of course, lawyers are wont to do, an alter ego of the individual who's operating the LLC. When they're one and the same, they're using the same cash accounts, et cetera, then there's more danger that you're not going to get the legal protection, the liability protection that LLCs typically offer. So be mindful of that. A couple other points around setting up an LLC, but why don't you take these away?
Sure. Let's take the example of Bob and Susie Investments, LLC. Fairly cute name, but those aren't their real names. And while that might be okay for Bob and Susie to use Bob and Susie in the name of the company, when it comes into the operating agreement for the LLC, and by the way, I strongly recommend that you have an operating agreement, even if your state does not require one. but Bob is not my name. My legal name is Robert. Susie is probably not Susie's name. It's Suzanne or Susan. And so when you name the members in your document, make sure that it says Robert and Susan, because when you go to the closing, you're not going to have a driver's license that says Bob or Susie. It's just one more thing to have to deal with there. It's one more signature. It's one more document. You don't want to do that. You want to try and keep it using your legal names, especially as they are designated within the document itself. Now, with respect to the name of your LLC, if you're going to have one that relates to the individual properties, it obviously makes sense to have the property address part of the name of the LLC. But I wouldn't recommend using names like Somersault or Handstand or anything like that. But just kidding. Backflip is probably all right, but there are some names that probably are not. Names that might be insulting to people. Names that might suggest that you are not serious. High on Cocaine Corporation. Not a good choice. It does not signal to lenders and counterparties that you are a serious individual trying to make money at this business. And so just be a little more mindful about what you're doing before you pick a name that might cause some sort of friction. Yeah, you want to have your bank account in the name of your entity is what I really wanted to drive at here, just because you want to keep the business separate from your personal affairs. And so it's best that not be a bank account in your name.
There are a lot of family businesses that operate under an LLC, and sometimes there are family issues, and that can affect the ability if the family, if there's marriage and there's a divorce and the spouses were the controlling members of the LLC and the operating agreement hasn't changed and the operating agreement requires unanimity among the managers of the company. What happens? How can the company continue to operate? Right. To Bob's point, you want to maintain, you want to stick to the formalities of the governing rules of this separate entity, and you want to, follow through on them and be able to document that you follow those procedures from decision to decision, from resolution to resolution. So what happens when there's a dissolution, if it's a married couple that are managing the LLC, right? Then you end up with the issue of deadlock, and the company really can't continue to operate if it has a deadlock management team. So again, something else to sort of think about when you're structuring your LLC.